All right, you're watching Live Now. I'm Austin, Westfall. Confusion remains after the Federal Aviation Administration abruptly announced a 10-day closure of airspace over El Paso, Texas, for a, quote, special security reason, only to reopen the skies fewer than 8 hours later. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy saying the closure was due to an incursion of drug cartel drones from Mexico. The order would have halted flights for 10 days to and from El Paso's International Airport. Instead, the FAA assured the public this morning that there is no threat to commercial aviation. POLITICO aviation reporter Oriana Pawlyk is here. This has a lot more to it. We've been hearing the reports coming out since this all happened earlier this morning. What is your reporting bringing you about what exactly caused all this to happen?
I think we're still seeing as most Americans woke up today, they saw a dizzying spell of news of what exactly was happening over the skies of El Paso. And I think that there are more questions than answers at this moment. I know that officials are still seeking some of those answers, but what we do know is that the FAA promptly closed the airspace, and it was for a very excessive amount of time, for 10 days, which is pretty much unheard of to do at an airport for so long, which is what gave so many officials pause on what exactly is going on. But nonetheless, the FAA acted saying it was a special security reason. And now we've come to learn that it was a laser technology that was being tested at a nearby Army base. What three-letter agency exactly was testing this laser technology to take out errant drones that are making incursions over the Mexico-U.S. border remains to be seen. I think officials are still clamoring for those answers themselves. We heard that from Capitol Hill just a little bit ago. But we are getting some of that trickling out now that the laser technology could have been very disruptive to commercial traffic. And the FAA wanted to ensure that commercial passenger safety was adhered to before anything else could go further.
I was reading some reporting from the AP within the past hour or so. They say that the Pentagon allowed U.S. Customs and Border Protection to use an anti-drone laser earlier this week, and that led to the FAA suddenly closing the airspace. You know what I don't quite get is the 10-day piece of this. Have we gotten any clarity on why a 10-day-long closure was called for in the first place?
I had spoken to a source that had said that the 10-day extension had to do with a meeting that the FAA was supposed to have with the Pentagon regarding the discussion about how exactly this technology would affect commercial airspace. And the meeting would have taken place next week. So what happened was the FAA wasn't sure on this technology. They didn't want to let the Pentagon go forward with this. Again, as you cited, the AP and us and others that have said that there was some testing that was going on. Exactly what day and when, possibly earlier this week, prompted the FAA to act sooner, because the CBP or Army or whomever ended up testing the technology, and it gave, again, the FAA pause. So they didn't necessarily, they wanted to bring the Pentagon to the table to have this discussion much sooner than later. But that's what the initial reason for the 10-day closure span for.
Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum was asked about this earlier today. She was asked about the U.S.'s drug cartel drone explanation. She said she had no information about the use of drones on the border. A U.S. official confirmed to Fox News also that the U.S. military earlier this week shot down what was later determined to be a party balloon near El Paso after initially assessing it as a possible foreign drone. Is there evidence that drones were a factor in this decision?
I think that we've heard, especially from the Pentagon, that there are roughly 1,000 drone incursions at the border on a monthly basis. Again, who's operating those drones? Nonetheless, they say that it's unsafe to do so, and they want to take precautionary measures. So there are incursions that do happen. In this specific instance, as you just pointed out, it could have been balloons, it could have been a drone, it could have been us testing on our own drones, it could have been us trying to intercept a drone from a foreign adversary across the border. That is, again, something that lawmakers are desperately asking those questions to try to unveil who exactly the target was here. But the FAA, again, took that precautionary measure from the get-go. And I think that a lot of that discussion stems from the miscommunication that the FAA has had previously with the Pentagon, as we saw from the fallout from the DCA air collision last year, and them wanting to get ahead of certain things. And they didn't want a catastrophic incident on their hands yet again.
Yeah, how would you describe the communication between the Pentagon and the FAA during this incident?
Definitely something that I think lawmakers are again trying to get answers to because some officials described to me that people were left out of the loop, that no one was given a heads up, or if they were given a heads up, they came too late. And the FAA said that's not enough time to give us that kind of detail. We want many more details before you put this type of technology in the path of commercial air traffic. So ultimately, wires got crossed. Somebody needed to give some more details, and everyone wanted to just get back to square one before any further escalation kind of happened.
You know, local officials say they were given little or no warning about the airspace closure. My understanding is that there were people whose flights, understandably, were impacted quite a bit because of this. Some video from the terminals earlier today. Obviously, this caused quite a headache for so many people who were traversing this airport earlier this morning. You know, before we go here, this is a confusing one in a lot of ways, Oriana. What are your lingering questions? What about this incident remains unanswered tonight?
I think that, again, we have to talk about why there is such a mismatch on how we deal with drones in the United States. I think a lot of lawmakers want to know how they can solve this gap, this problem of why certain agencies have the authority to take out drones, why others do not, and why this is such a patchwork framework instead of a universal way of looking at how we deal with drones in this country, especially at a time when drones are making headway in multiple industries, whether that is for drone delivery or drone inspection and using these types of technologies. I'm sure that's a big headache for the industry. So everyone kind of wants to get on the same page when it comes to how do we operate safely, and what agencies need to be in on this and in on the know of how to move forward. So that way this could be a harmonious solution.
Oriana Pawlyk is a aviation reporter with Politico. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.